Audrey and Rusty. One of our new members, Reverend Nicholas Beasley, is going to offer our invocation for us today.
Let us pray. We thank you, O God, for the gift of this day, for the energy and strength that you have given us to rise and meet its challenges and opportunities. And we pray for your blessing on this food and this time together, that we may be strengthened and sustained as we work towards your purposes. And this we ask in the name of Christ, our Lord. Amen.
All right. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Hunter Wilson is on his way to the podium to introduce visiting Rotarians and guests. And as he's walking up here, I just want to remind everybody about the cart buckets sitting on your tables. Please give generously to the cart fund.
We don't have any visiting Rotarians today, but if anyone has a guest, please stand up and be introduced.
Hello, David Reneker with Crestcom Bank, and I have with me Julia Howe. Julia is a mortgage originator with Crestcom Bank.
Good afternoon, I'm Karen Blackman, and my guest today is Nancy Spencer. She's with Aliera Healthcare.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. Appreciate your flexibility in filling in today. And welcome to our two guests. Summer has started. It seems like schools are winding down. I know my kids are out tomorrow, and it looks like we're missing a couple tables of people because of that. So hopefully our members are having fun wherever they are. I'd like to welcome to the podium past President Rusty DePass, who's going to do health and happiness for us today. You may have seen in the newsletter that the club is looking for a new pianist, and it's certainly not because of the way Rusty plays, nor his commitment to the club, because he's here every Monday playing on the keys for us and does a great job. So, Rusty.
Yeah, it is because of the way I play too, and I don't blame you. I don't blame you in the least. I didn't expect you to call up here quite this soon. I'm sorry. We have some news from members today, which we don't always have, but I think it's fun when I do this, that I was telling Stephen right before, we had 324 members when I was president of this club. That was before many of you were born, probably, but anyway, and I set out as one of my goals that I was going to meet every single member of the Columbia Rotary Club. The only one that I did not meet was an old man by the name of Oscar Lever, who had been involved in the Department of Education way back in the 40s, and I think he was maybe a Rotarian as far back as the late 30s. But anyway, he had gone to Baltimore to live with his daughter, and I thought that was a little much to go to Baltimore to meet him, but I did talk to him on the telephone. So anyway, but I like to call some of the members that we don't normally see and encourage them to come visit with us again and see how they're getting along and so forth and so on. So this is the result of my efforts today. Smitty Harrison, who does come occasionally, but Smitty doesn't get here much because he's still suffering from his leg injury, which was 2 or 3 years ago, after falling off of a 2-step stool. His injury is the same as the one that ended Joe Theismann's football career, and Smitty wasn't even playing football. But he still uses a walker, except for short distances at home, and is looking down the barrel of 2 more surgeries in the near future to try to fix his leg. He watches all the videos, he says, of our meetings, so I hope I got everything right. He sends his best to all of you, and I told him that, in fact, I told all these people that we all wish them the very best. Ruth Ziegler is still at home, recovering from the stroke that she had a couple months ago. She has physical therapists that go by the house and work with her, and is making good progress, but it is very slow progress. I talked to Bill Clowney this morning. Now, Clowney's not sick, but he's old, and he's just doing great. He lives now full time at the beach at the Isle of Palms in a house that they have owned for over 50 years. He attends one of the Mount Pleasant Rotary Club meetings from time to time. Still comes to Columbia twice a year, he says, to see his doctor, and is surrounded with children, grandchildren, and even 5 great-grandchildren. Now, to top it all off, Murray Price, whom I bet, how many of you know Murray Price? Just a handful of you. Let me tell you, every time I call Murray, it makes my day. Murray Price is 98 years old. He flew B-24s in World War II. He says that old age-itis has finally caught up with him. And I told him that I thought it was authorized, it should be authorized for old age-itis to catch up with him at age 98. But his mind is as sharp as any one of you, in fact, sharper than some of you. He still drives, so those of you who live in Lexington, be on the lookout for Murray Price. But he still drives, still goes to church, and lives by himself. And he just is a wonderful guy, and he's just a real inspiration to all of us. Jim Hamilton is, of course, confined to his home in order to care for his wife, who has Alzheimer's. And but otherwise, he says he's doing well. So that's the report from at least 5 of our older members who don't get here to be with us much anymore. I'm told that, gosh, I've forgotten again. Hal Stevenson and somebody else, Alan Robertson, have birthdays today. Where are they? Happy birthday to you. I want to tell you that there are some questions here that I think are timeless. One of them is at a movie theater. Which armrest is yours? You ever thought about that? In the word scent, you grammarians out there, in the word scent, is the S silent or is the C silent? If people evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys around? Why is there a D in fridge but no D in refrigerator? These are cosmic questions. The last of which is, who knew what time it was when the first clock was made? I want you to know that I recently ordered a chicken and an egg from Amazon. I'll let you know which one comes first. Now we've all done this, and I know many of you, like me, you go into a room and you don't know why you went there and so forth, but I want you to know that I went into another room this morning and actually remembered why I went there. Now, it was the bathroom, but still, now I grew up in a drinking family, and I make no apologies for that, but I wondered the other day if I didn't have a problem. Susan asked me to toast some bread for her, and so I raised my glass and said, "Here's the bread." When I turn 80, I am convinced that I will not need glasses. I'll just drink from the bottle. And the last one is this: I've never been much of a bar hop. I don't disapprove. I just don't find it very stimulating to go to bars. Drinking at home is much better because you can drink in your pajamas and there's no last call. Have a nice week.
Thank you, Rusty. Great humor, and appreciate all the time and energy you put into health and happiness. Really appreciate you checking on our club members who don't get to make it. That's a really, really thoughtful thing to do, and we all enjoyed hearing about it. Cynthia, would you show the Bocce Bash income statement slide? I sent you. Right before the meeting kicked off, we showed the video again. We tried showing it a couple weeks ago at a very, very busy, crowded meeting. We had a lot on the agenda. Today is not that kind of meeting, so we hope you have seen the link to our bocce ball tournament that took place on April 27th. It was a lot of fun. Many of you have asked me recently, how did we do? You know, what was the haul, so to speak? And I can't even read that anymore now that I'm 40 years old, so I'll get a little closer. This is the final income statement for the tournament. We raised $41,194. You can see $28,000 came in sponsorships, $400 per team, total of $10,900 for teams. Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Oh, where did
Sure, we
it
have time today. Here we go. We had a raffle that day that brought in a little bit of money. We sold extra tickets for the bar and for lunch for guests that came, and then we had some miscellaneous contributions as well and donations from members of our club who were not able to go but were able to support it. So $41,194. This gives you a breakdown of the expenses that we paid to the Fireflies for t-shirts, sponsor signs, cups and koozies, bags, trophies, the insurance that we covered ourselves with. And so we netted almost $30,000, which we shared with the Special Olympics, 40%. So we cleared just under $12,000. So that's the breakdown. I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again in a couple weeks. I really appreciate everybody in here who helped make that happen. And I think we have something to build on for next year. It should be easier to grow it and continue our success. A couple of announcements from me. The board met back on the 23rd of May, right after our meeting before Memorial Day, and a couple of updates for the club. The board approved 2 leave of absences, one for Danny Garnett and one for Phil Truesdale. So if you see Danny or Phil out in the community, please talk to them and tell them we hope to see them back here soon. We also terminated the membership for Shannon Baker. We haven't been able to get in touch with Shannon for a while, so she's no longer a member of the club. Any questions about the club? I'll open it up. We've got a few extra minutes. Any questions about anything going on? Hal?
How's our operating budget these days? Are we in the black?
We are in the black. Operating budget is much stronger than it was. We have, those of you may or may not know this, but we started sending letters to members whose account balances are getting high and creeping up. And so, several years ago, we carried about $12,000 to $13,000 in AR greater than 90 days. Now that number's down to $3,000 or $4,000, and our operating account had averaged in In April, it averaged over $12,000, at any given time. So we are, in a much more stable position, and our budget has actually been pretty consistent with what the board approved for this year. So things are definitely looking better. The other accounts that the club has, just so you know, I mentioned the $12,000 in our operating account. We have a Centennial Fund account that was created during past President John Backus's year, and we have about $26,000 in that account, and that is just for the club to take part and do service work and do what we want with it. It's not restricted toward education, so that's a great thing. Now, of that $26,000, about 18 of it is restricted for the water project. So two members, one in our club, one in another, gave money toward a Rotary International water project in Peru. And Andrew Clarkson told you a little bit about that earlier this year, and we're working on our application now. It takes some time. It's going to carry over from my year into Luis's year. So even with that, that leaves about $8,000 in the basically a service account is how I would describe it. This $12,000 that we made for the Bocce Bash has not been, I'm waiting on the check from the Special Olympics, but we haven't deposited it yet. And we have some flexibility in which account we want to put it in. Our investment account, which is the Columbia Rotary Scholarship Fund, has about $750,000 in it. It can change its month to month. So that account is doing quite well as the market is doing well. And we anticipate continuing to fund $40,000 a year in scholarships. The majority of it comes out of that account. But years when the market is down, it's nice to raise a little extra money, raise a little extra cash to be able to top off those scholarships and other service projects that future presidents of the club and future members of our club will want to accomplish. So, any other questions about the club, membership, anything? All right, very good. Well, I am pleased to welcome Elliot Powell to the podium. He is going to introduce our speaker.
Rusty's hit on something. I was out of town, got contacted by Louisa to introduce our speaker today. I knew the name instantly, but I could not picture her face. And it's one of my biggest fears. It seems like it's amazing that I've been able to survive in sales, because I'll walk into a room and I'll see somebody and I know I've got to say something to them, and I'm just, what's their name? And then that name, Nancy Collum, just hit hard. I knew it had something to do with my work with Gills Creek Watershed, but I remember, I was reminded by my sister that they are very close friends. She's actually one of a group that they put together called the OWLS, the Outrageous Wilderness Ladies Society. My sister's an archaeologist with USC, just retired, and been all over the world, and I've been all over the world, and nothing to tell you. South Carolina is where I want to be. It's the people. They're different. They're just good people. We learned during the floods and so many other situations down in Charleston, etc., just how the quality of our people is unbelievable. One of the also most important things about what I love about this state is the diversity of we're from the mountains to the Midlands to the lakes, down to the coast. Preserving that's really important. I consider myself to be a conservative, but also an environmentalist. And the lady that's going to speak to us today is definitely not contained to her job description, her title. She's been on many fronts, championing our environment, championing our history, our heritage, and she is just extremely in the middle of it all. You never know it because she's very humble, and she would rather other people be in the front, which is another quality I appreciate my sister. She's not really that way. She's going to tell you every detail of her life if you let her. I call my sister Indiana Jones with a skirt, because she's really been all over the world. But right there with her in many situations, Nancy Collum's been there. Y'all have probably gotten the bio information, which you always should read before we come to the club. I'll just quickly go through a few items. Nancy Collum is the Conservation Coordinator for the Richland County Conservation Division and has been with the county for over 8 years. Nancy staffs the Conservation Commission and manages the Conservation Easement Program, the Historic and Conservation Grants Program, and a number of special projects. She has worked in natural resources, environmental, and conservation organizations in Columbia her whole career. Nancy received a bachelor's degree and a master's of public health at USC. She enjoys kayaking, hiking, and traveling. Many of y'all might have just seen the article that came out over in Venice, where the cruise ship ran into, a huge cruise ship ran into another cruise boat. And she was actually on that same boat that got crushed by the cruise ship about 3 weeks ago. So, close call there. Just in the news, I think yesterday, the day before. Nancy's married to Steve Collum. She has 2 grown daughters. She has a grandson, Henry, which we'll come back to. I worked with Gills Creek Watershed Association for a couple of decades, and she was very instrumental and very much a resource and continues to be for that organization, and really has been quite an interesting process to see that organization grow and do things. She was the river keeper before Congaree had a river keeper. She was the Congaree queen back in, I wasn't supposed to say that, but she definitely is one of those people that has done a lot for not only the rivers here, but the coast. She worked with Dana Beach and Coastal Conservation. She was a lobbyist with them. But her pride and joy is her 14-month-old Henry. And I've been trying to think, what is this kid going to end up being? Is he going to be the next Marlon Perkins, or the crocodile hunter, or Mackie, or Indiana Jones? This kid is going to have an exciting grandmother, and we're excited to have you here today, and looking forward to all that's happening in Richland County. Thank you.
Oh my, I've never had an introduction like that, and I didn't have any idea you'd be doing all this research on me. Okay. Well, as he said, I work for the Conservation Division, which is a very small 5-person office in the planning department. And we staff 2 different entities, the Richland County Conservation Commission and the Richland Soil and Water Conservation District. And you all are probably familiar with the conservation districts because you have a chance to vote on commissioners in the November elections, and they have in their districts all across the country. But the Conservation Commission is something unique to Richland County. Let's see if I can. Is this on? No. No, I need glasses. So the commission was created back in 1998 by council, and each council member appoints 1 member to represent their district to the commission. The council funds the Conservation Commission with $1/2 million of your taxpayer dollars.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
No, I have to back up. The commission is charged with protecting and promoting the county's historic, natural, and cultural resources. Hello? There we go. And promoting nature-based tourism and nature-based recreation. It was a little slow. Okay. One of the ways that we do conservation is by preserving land. This is the best way to protect the natural resources that we all rely on. And so to do that, but it's not feasible or desirable for government to purchase all the land that we deem worthy of protecting for its natural or historic significance. So we use a tool called a conservation easement. With an easement, landowners agree to preserve the natural values of that property in perpetuity which is just a way longer time than I can grasp, especially since people have to monitor these easements every year. So I'm interested to see 50 or 100 years down the road how that works, but I won't be here, so I won't have to worry about it. As a landowner, you have certain property rights. You have a bundle of property rights, as the lawyers like to say. And in a conservation easement, you give up a few of those rights. And primarily, that's the right to subdivide your property. So this is saying that maybe you're going to keep a couple of home sites out for your children to build on, but the majority of that property is going to remain intact and natural. So that means that you're not going to be able to sell it to a developer to put a subdivision in, or commercial development or industrial purposes. It's going to remain intact. And so if you've got your own piece of heaven that you're enjoying hunting and fishing on, or bird watching, or farming, timbering, whatever, and you don't want your heirs to sell that property for the highest and best use, then the only real thing you can do to permanently protect your land is to put it in a conservation easement. In fact, it's been said that conservation easements are the ultimate property right because you are determining what happens with your land from the grave. Something to think about. The owner still maintains all control of the property, retains title, can sell it, etc. This agreement is worked out with the land trust, with the Conservation Commission, whomever. It has to be voluntary, of course, but it's very flexible and it's negotiated. One size does not fit all. So there are all kinds of different determinations that can be made from one easement to the other. Conservation easements can be donated, and in fact that's primarily what happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when easements really gained in popularity. And then in early 2000s, the South Carolina Conservation Bank was created, and that is a fund that provides cash incentives to purchase the development rights, to purchase that right that you've given up with the subdivision. Richland County also provides a cash incentive. So this is something that can help people that may be land rich and cash poor. And then because the right that you've given up, this right to subdivide, has a monetary value that is determined by a qualified appraiser, that right becomes a charitable donation. You are giving up something for the public good, and therefore there are federal income tax deductions and state income tax credits for conservation easements. So there are some real incentives to do this. These are the kinds of properties that we're looking for in our easements: working lands along rivers and streams, trying to protect wildlife habitat. Scenic vistas is also a reason for a conservation easement. Most all of our easements have a water component, so whether it's a river or a creek or wetlands, and the idea with the conservation easement is that there would be a vegetated buffer all around the water body, and the purpose of that is, and the deeper the better for the buffer, is that slows down any pollutions, sedimentation, erosion coming off the land into the water. So the deeper that buffer, the more protection to the water there is, the better the water quality, and the better the wildlife habitat. Some developers have given up property that's potentially developable, but they've donated an easement and put in walking trails for the residents. So that's quite a nice amenity. A couple of years ago, we used the GIS system and gathered scientific criteria for parcels all across the county. There's a variety of criteria, but things like species diversity, wetlands, prime agricultural lands, the size of intact parcels. Because as you probably know, parcels keep getting smaller and smaller. It's called fragmentation, and that's a problem for farmers and wildlife and growing timber, so all kinds of issues. So that's one of the criteria. Use the scientific criteria to map the parcels of the county, and you can see those numbers where we've determined we think that's our best place to focus our attention for conservation easements, which is not to say that we won't accept them elsewhere, but that's where we'd like to focus. Now, we have two grant programs. The Conservation Grant Program provides funding for those various topics. Well, the right-hand picture is Belser Arboretum. We were able to make major improvements to the water flows coming off other people's property through the Arboretum and make some really great changes for them. Trail projects are a favorite of ours. The Friends of Harbison State Forest have done wonderful things with our grants. I don't know if any of you have done any mountain biking out there, but it's quite a mecca. But most of the, so many of those trails were old, eroded ones in low-lying areas, and so our grants have rerouted the trails up onto higher ground using sustainable trail building techniques. And with the kiosks and the new markers and maps, that place has become even more popular for mountain bikers and hikers. Our educational grants are for teaching teachers, teaching students, and teaching residents. You see the picture of the Rocky Shoal spider lilies. I hope you're aware that we're very lucky to have a few colonies in the Saluda, Broad, and Congaree River. These are only found in a very few places in South Carolina down to Alabama. And so our grant is to help teach people leave those lilies in the water. That's where they grow best, on the rocks and not in your backyard. Our Historic Preservation Grant Program is, we spend a little more money on that than we do on the other conservation grant program because we spend other money on conservation projects. So this one is generally about $170,000 a year. So over the years, we've spent now $2.5 million, which just blows my mind. But it all first started with the Harriet Barber House. Harriet and Sam Barber were enslaved people who bought 40 acres and a mule from the South Carolina Land Commission and built this house in 1872. And has remained in the Barber family all these years and was lived in up until the 1980s. Of course, it fell into bad repair, and so we started the grant program really to help get this project off the ground. And so now it's center of a lot of community activities, and just this past February hosted one of the traveling Smithsonian exhibits. So it's being well utilized. Another early project I want you all to know about is the Pine Grove Rosenwald School. Julius Rosenwald was the president of Sears and Roebuck back in the early 1900s, and he was one that really grew it into the biggest retailer in the whole world. And he became friends with Booker T. Washington, who encouraged him to spend some of his money on African American education. And so from about 1917 to the early 1930s, the Rosenwald Fund helped fund 5,000 African American schools and teacher houses and workshops in the Southeast. Quite an accomplishment. And in Richland County, there were 15, but there's only the one left now, and this is Piney Grove over on Piney Woods Road in the Harbison area, owned by the Recreation Commission. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was turned into a community center, but our funds were able to restore the windows and the siding and take off that ugly 60s paneling and return it to a semblance of the two classrooms that were there. And so that's available to visit, and we're trying to get more schools to use that in their study program. I know you all are well aware of these buildings. We were proud to be able to be an initial part in supporting the facade development of 701 and also of Nickelodeon. And you all have seen for yourselves just what a change on Main Street and in the Olympia community these two buildings have helped foster. Some of our other grants have been spent on educational materials, like this 3-part series that Progressive Network did on Trailblazers in Richland County. We fund National Register nominations, and you may have heard that last week the 5 Points Historic District was listed on the National Register, and that was through a fund from us, a grant from us. The Randolph Cemetery is a very important African-American cemetery just below Elmwood Cemetery, and it did suffer a good bit of deterioration and neglect over the years, but we've given them several grants to restore the monuments and markers there. There were about a dozen Reconstruction era legislators that were buried here, as well as other prominent African Americans. Let me go back. And I wanted to tell you about my favorite one, the B-25C Mitchell bomber down in the corner. This is the only known intact plane that was part of Doolittle's fleet that he used to train the pilots here in Columbia. And it got sent up to Greenville Army Air Base and was flying on D-Day, and the pilot had to ditch into Lake Greenwood. So this plane was in Lake Greenwood for almost 40 years before it was recovered. The South Carolina Historic Aviation Foundation purchased it 10 or 12 years ago, and they've been busy restoring it ever since. It's just this group of volunteers, a more enthusiastic group you'll never find. I would encourage, I'm going to tell Louisa she needs to invite them for a program, but they, every second Saturday of the month, they have open house at Owens Field. The very first hangar, I think, is Y1. And so this Saturday, July 8th, they'll be there from 10 to 1, and I'd really encourage you to go out and talk with them. They will just explain everything they've done, and they've got a whole lot more information there. They're really trying to create a museum at some point. So I think you'd really enjoy visiting with them. These are some other recent projects at Curtis Wright Hangar. I'm sure most of you all have been out to see the transformation there. But we funded an engineering study, structural engineering study years ago that was then used recently to rebuild those columns that had just deteriorated from the weight of the hangar doors. Ebenezer Lutheran Church on Richland Street has a chapel now, and that was built in the 1870s. They didn't realize that there were cupolas on that building until they found a postcard in their archives just recently. So we were able to help rectify that matter and put cupolas back. And then a smaller but no less important project is a corn crib out in Blythewood. This was built in the 1880s, and so the project was to take it all apart, move it slightly, and then rebuild it with as much original wood as possible. And so now it's a part of the curriculum at Camp Discovery, a really worthwhile place. And then right around the corner from here is the newest museum in Richland County. Sherry and Jake Jaco, you may know them. They are the ones that spearheaded this. And that building on the bottom left is how it looked in 2014 when they were able to buy that with help from the county. It was built in 1901 as a house, but it was immediately used as a schoolhouse. So that very first year, there were 30 students in the house, and it grew to over 100 children in that house by 1909, so that by 1910 is when they built the new real brick schoolhouse. This picture on the right-hand corner, they've taken off the vinyl siding. They found the brick asphalt siding that was put on, I'm not sure when, maybe 30s or 40s. And today it looks like this. All of the replacement windows were taken out, and the original windows were beautifully restored and put back in. County required the fire escape and, of course, the handicapped access. And then in November they opened up, and so Fridays and Saturdays, I think from 10 to 4, the museum is open and would welcome your visit. We fund historical markers. We're always looking for areas, especially in the unincorporated area of the county, to put up new markers to note important events that have taken place. So if you've got some ideas, I'd love to talk with you. And just for any of you that live in a historic building, historic being something that's on the National Register or contributing property of a National Historic District, you are eligible for the Bailey Bill, which means if you want to do certain kinds of improvements to your house, a new roof, other kinds of things, this program will allow you to be certified to be in the program, and then you make the improvements, but the value of all those improvements is not added to the value of the house. So your property tax remains at the pre-rehabilitation value for 20 years. So this is quite an incentive, and it's certainly has been one of the incentives helping drive the development on Main Street. But it's not just for big buildings, it's also for residents. And then I really want to let you know about this big property that the county owns. The bottom part, well, first let me just point out how close that is to Congaree National Park. So on the west side of Congaree, the bottom in the red is Mill Creek Mitigation Bank. The county bought this property in 2014 to use as mitigation for all the transportation penny projects that are continue to be built. So anytime you're building a road or widening a road, putting in a new bridge, you are undoubtedly impacting some streams or wetlands. And so in that case, you have to do something to mitigate that, and this mitigation bank provides credits to do that. And what's happening is all the changes that were made on this land when it was farmed are being taken out so that it's hydrologically restored to its original condition. So that's the swap off for the filling the streams or wetlands that are needed for the transportation penny projects. So that's what's happening. That's all under a conservation easement, and some recreational activities can go on in there. The commission bought the property in the blue in 2016. Originally, of course, it was all the Mill Creek Hunting Preserve. So, so now we own that the county owns that section, and one of our big focuses is to do something with this property. It's public land. We want to make it available to the public in a thoughtful conservation way, but a way that allows people to get in there and do things. And one of the impetus for all of this is that Congaree National Park receives about 160,000 visitors a year, and they spend some $7.8 million a year within a 60-mile radius. We want more of that money and more people coming to Lower Richland. So we hired a firm to come up with a plan specifically for what to do with Mill Creek and another county property on Cabin Branch, but also to help the local community develop the businesses that tourists will want to use, cafes, bed and breakfast, outfitters, that kind of thing. So to grow the whole local economy so that the residents there benefit from increased tourism coming in. So this is a big plan. It is on our website, although it's a lot to read on the website. But we are starting, our next step is to get a master plan for the Mill Creek property developed so that we can start moving forward, asking the county for money to put in the various kinds of lodging opportunities there, or the river access so that that people can canoe or kayak a much shorter distance, but get that experience on the Congaree River. So there's a whole lot of things that we want to do in Lower Richland, and it's an uphill battle. It's a long-term plan, I should say. So in a nutshell, those are some of the major programs of the Conservation Commission. We have a lot of other things going on, but if you've got some questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Yes, sir.
Does forest preservation fall into your area?
What, forest?
Forest.
Yes.
My question's around development, residential development. It seems like these days developers and builders are just going in and clear cutting hundreds of acres, just swiping it off the earth. Is there any plan in there to do any kind of preservation around that? I live in an older neighborhood, and the trees were left basically intact except for the home sites. But now, more intense, high-density housing projects, I understand that, but there's no trees wiped out for probably hundreds of acres, at a time.
That is a real concern for us. The county is going through a rewrite of the county ordinances concerning land development, and that is one of the issues that's being addressed, is about tree canopy and tree clearing. There isn't anything right now to present to the public, but when those meetings come up, that is a really important time for people to come to the meeting and say, we like our trees and we want to preserve them. And realtors know that they can get more money for buildings with trees. I mean, it's shown, but they can cram a lot more houses in if they cut all those trees. So it's really important for the public to say, we care about this, we want some changes made.
Just a quick tag on to that previous comment. It seems like people are surprised when we have heavy rains and we have flooding in those exact same areas.
Right. That's an absolutely important part of the whole stormwater runoff issues.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Nancy, earlier one slide you talked a little bit about historical markers. Is there an app, I'm talking about your phone apps, that you say this is the best one to use to look at the historical markers? As you're riding by in the car, the light turns green and goes. I wonder what that was.
I know there's a historical marker database that has all the markers that are standing, but they're listed in alphabetical order by the town they're in. So it's not I'm not aware of a phone app like that.
The land that you were talking about on the easement outside of Congaree, it borders Westinghouse?
No, Westinghouse is further west of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
is there any concern of private utilities buying that land since it is publicly owned?
No, the county's not going to be selling that property. And in fact, there are some other properties close by would be interested in putting an easement on to protect our investment in the Mill Creek property. It's 2,500 acres, so the county has a real investment in protecting that land. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to the golf course up at Blakewood, the Cricket Tree Golf Course? And isn't there a conservation easement placed on that property? Or?
No, there is not.
Okay.
It was zoned traditional recreation open space. And this afternoon at 3 o'clock, the Planning Commission is going to hear another request from the new owners, eCapital, to rezone that from traditional recreation to low-density residential development. We are concerned about that. I don't know what's going to happen. Mrs. Dickerson has said that the county is not going to buy that property and use it as recreational space, as a lot of people have suggested would be a good idea. So there is probably likely going to be an action taken this afternoon, and then it will go to council for their determination as to what to do. Jerry?
We have laws that let us put aside land for conservation purposes. Can the lawyers of the future take it back? Take these laws back and suddenly start using it like they're trying to do now on the coast of Georgetown?
With the seawalls? The conservation easement legislation there's federal and state legislations. And because the IRS is involved with the tax benefits, I think that would be much more difficult to change those laws. But, and then this is the issue with conservation easements, the first generation that decides to put the land under an easement has all this vested interest in keeping it natural. And then when somebody else buys it, the second generation, they may not be as committed to it. And so that's when the issues come in. You have to monitor the property, make sure that everything everything's being done the way it's supposed to be. And as that goes down the road, there may be some real pressures before Congress and the General Assembly to change those laws. I don't know. That's a possibility. Yes, sir.
Spoken on this before, SCG, the electric company, keeps kind of massacring our trees. Is there anything we can do about that in our neighborhood?
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure that we have any standing to get involved with those issues. I'm sorry to say.
That's kind of what we're going to need y'all to do.
You're right. I think probably most of the neighborhoods affected are in the city. Well, I'm just trying to bail out here because I don't know what we could do, but I will bring that up to the commission that people are interested in their trees and not having them slaughtered as the utilities want to do. Yes, sir.
It seems to be that there's a divide. There's the business community and the conservation community, and there are always conflict. Are there ongoing efforts to try to build some compromise, some strategies to just include the business community in decisions and try to find compromises so that they're always not doing this, that there's some coordination and everybody, there's education, I think, with both sides that needs to occur. Do y'all have any plans to do that?
Well, we did do that when the last time there were changes made in the ordinance concerning land development. There was something called the Development Roundtable, and there were a certain group of conservationists and a group of home builders. And they did work through a whole array of issues and came to consensus on those and took that to council and I said, okay, we both agree on this. And so that is a model for what needs to be done.
Nancy, thank you so much for coming today. We've got a very conservation-minded club, and I think everybody really enjoyed your presentation. We hope you'll come back and visit again soon. President-elect Louisa is in Germany for the Rotary International Convention, but next week our speaker is Rear Admiral Cedric Pringle, so please come and bring a guest. And with that, we will stand and close.